He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I am your host Taylor, and today we're just going headfirst into encounters. Now, a little mixture of Dogman, Bigfoot, and something new that I found and will most definitely be exploring in a near future episode. Before we get into it, a couple of plugs. Last week, we dropped an episode focusing on an encounter in the Clayoquot Sound area of British Columbia and Vancouver Island. Definitely check that out. And earlier this month, Reuben and I hit episode 100 on our main feed. If you tune into that, you'll find us convening on past, present, and future things and notes of the show while we have just an overall laid-back, good time conversation. Without further ado, though, let's get into our first sighting of Dogman during a drive to Florida. And I quote, "I wanted to share this story that happened about a month ago to my wife." I'm sorry, this is a bit of a story. As I'm typing this out down below, I realize that it's a lot of typing for a sighting that perhaps wasn't as long or involved as some of the others, but we have talked so much about it that I wanted to be as thorough as I could. Me and my wife work in television, and it requires a lot of traveling and a lot of late-night car rides. We live in Florida, and my wife had to go to Georgia for work. Because we take so many plane rides, we sometimes decide when it's 4 to 7 hours that we'll drive. And believe me, after 20 plus years of planes, being able to drive every once in a while is a blessing because you get so fed up with sitting in planes. It's about 11:30 p.m., and when her brother texts me to pick up the phone when she calls, which I thought was odd because why would I not pick up? As soon as I'm reading the text, I get a frantic phone call from my wife. Now, please understand that my wife doesn't subscribe to any cryptid paranormal stuff. However, most certainly I do. So for her to be this freaked out and panicked means something crazy went down. She starts talking real fast and I can't understand any of what she's telling me. So eventually I tell her to calm down and tell me what is going on. She starts telling me, "I've seen one of those things you sometimes talk about, the documentary thing." Still kind of puzzled, I asked her, "What docu thing exactly?" She replies, "The wolf thing, the human wolf." "Dogman?" "Yes." She's driving down from Georgia, and at this point, 2 hours removed from our house, and we're located just above Tampa. So she's already driving in Florida, but she's driving down this 45-mile-per-hour road to give you an idea of the road itself. So not a big, broad road. As she's making a turn, her lights hit. What she at that moment thinks, a man standing bent over on the side of the road. She figures that's really odd because who would be standing in the middle of the night in a small, not lit road? And then as the light is hitting it more and more, she realizes that there's something off here. As the light is climbing up, she gets closer, revealing that the arms are completely covered in hair, and it's reaching to pick up something off the ground. She also sees massive hands. And then, when it's fully lit, this thing is hunched over and is already standing at 7 feet and starts to move up. She sees a complete canine head with ears pointed backwards. She tells me that everything, despite going pretty fast, it's like everything is slowing down for her so that her brain can make sense of it. She tells me it has really long, thin arms, very muscular though. Short fur with longer fur at the back and neck where the thighs meet. By the time she passes it, it almost stood up completely and has not once looked at her direction or acknowledged the car or the light, and it is as if this thing really didn't care. She tells me that she was on the phone with her brother as she sees this thing, and she started screaming when she saw it because her brother to also freak out and ask her what is going on and what she's seeing, which is when she rambles on to him and tells him she's got to call me. After she tells me the story, I calm her down, tell her not to get out of the car anymore until she gets home, and ask if she has enough gas to make it without stopping at a gas station, which she does. She carries a firearm on her, but there was no way she was going to stand a chance against this thing if it decided to go for the car or her. We talk a bit as I can tell she's in shock, and she tells me that she's trying to make sense of it. She wonders if anyone from a YouTube prankster to someone just in a suit to try and create sightings, but none of those make any sense as it never led to anything. And that road is completely deserted and in the middle of nowhere. Now, does that rule out that it wasn't? No. But nonetheless, it was a sighting. And for my wife, it was very real. After we hung up, I kept making sure she was okay and got spooked, and especially because I enjoy a lot of the cryptid stuff, and realizing that 2 hours away from our house, that is pretty remote and surrounded by acres of land and woods, isn't that far. I grabbed my 308 M1A SOCOM and basically sat downstairs waiting to hear the garage so I could come and greet her. And when she did, she was still a bit shaken up, and we spoke about it with some friends and family members the days after. End quote. This is a tricky scenario because you aren't there, but it involves someone you trust and care deeply for. I know my wife at times has told me something, and I immediately may feel a sense of disbelief or doubt, depending on what that is. But I attribute this to the way we are raised, not necessarily human nature, because in some cultures, you can see even through a claim is beyond outrageous, it's treated with seriousness and handled accordingly. Western society doesn't really act on this, though. We act on seeing is believing, a term frequently used in Christmas movies. Ultimately, though, what this man did in the closing portion of the encounter to me is justified. It's remote where they live. Lots of land and woods around them. Lots of people report being followed home or to a specific remote location after seeing a dogman. The fact that the dogman didn't acknowledge the woman driving gives me hope that it probably was not curious and didn't follow her or any of them to their house, which is a good thing. But it is really weird how they have a sort of obsession and fixation on a person after a sighting. So to guard your property makes complete sense to me in the off chance that it does follow. That's, again, not limited just to dogmen. There are reports of Bigfoot traversing miles just to follow and then get to a person's property, and the people are reporting, oh my gosh, there's the whoops, there's the calls out in the distance, and I just can't believe they followed. Whether or not it's the same one, or they were able to just, fire off a samurai chatter over the hillside and let another family group go to this property, who knows, but I digress. Our next experience, however, is focused on Bigfoot in the LaSalle Mountains near Moab, Utah. And I quote, I went on a long hike today in the LaSalle Mountains near Moab, Utah. About 3 miles into my hike, I had the feeling that I was being watched and followed, but it didn't feel like a cougar. I spent a lot of time in the woods and virtually never feel like I'm being watched. Today just felt off. I don't know why, but I tried to reach out telepathically and basically said, hello, I'd like to walk through your woods, but I don't want to take anything or leave anything. I would just like to enjoy your mountains and then leave it as I found it. I would love to meet you if you're open to it. After I said this in my mind, I walked another 400 yards around a pinhook turn, so I was now above where I was when I reached out telepathically. And then the winds changed, and I smelled something I've never smelled before. If you've ever harvested a deer in the rain, you probably know that smell. It smelled like a wet deer, but stronger. It didn't smell putrid or rotten, though. I looked up and saw a lenticular cloud, and another cloud that was different than the others went overhead. Then I continued on with my hike, but continued to feel like I was being watched without feeling like I was in danger. Then again, maybe it was just the altitude, but I'll never forget that smell that I've never smelled before. Has anyone had a similar experience? End quote. My sister, on a little bit of a side tangent here, is very passionate about the forest. She loves to take her family into the woods and do nature walks to absorb and then just take in that grounded energy of Mother Nature. In doing so, they speak out. Now, this is something I think is respectable, but also relatable to another situation. In the case of this woman speaking out telepathically, you might also have seen, if you've done a few watch-alongs of other paranormal investigators, in haunted environments, sometimes they will vocally state, "I am protected and I do not give you permission to follow or attach onto me. Once I leave, you will not come with me." It's a good reassertion into that mental and physical world that powers beyond our sight and detection cannot breach that. It's basically vocalizing this law and this claim that this is factual. Now, this person's experience could be a complete coincidence, just a fluke, or that slight chance that it's not. With all the mind-speaking reports in relation to Sasquatch, perhaps it's not out of the realm of possibility for one to respond to this person's mental statement. It does also remind me back when I was attending the Nicola Valley Bigfoot Conference in the Okanagan, attending that with Reuben. And there was a lady that appeared, and you can go back and you can tune into our episode where we basically cover everything from that conference. But in Cliff Notes version, this lady was basically a Sasquatch communicator, and the things that she was explaining and talking about did involve a certain degree of what you're thinking in your mind and how you're facing these situations. And so I do believe that Sasquatch is capable of feeling, and if they aren't telepathic, because there's so many convoluted theories on this, it could easily be an explained logical notion of when you're out in the woods and you see a predator and you start to tense up, they can detect that. And maybe it is just a simple form of detection on a body. Maybe it's a tell or something like that humans have. And just because we can be prey at the end of the day. When you're out in the woods, you're not the top of the food chain unless you got like a powerful sidearm and a rifle and you're just ready to go. But that's a whole another can of worms. Moving on, though, from that, we have another dog-man encounter. And I quote, "A dog-man encounter said to me at a gathering. A man and his 3 friends were all in a car together, heading north from their home city, and as they were driving, at some point, each and every person in that vehicle spotted this huge bipedal hairy thing cross the highway in front of them. Now, they reported that its strides allowed it to cross the highway in only a few steps. It appeared to be around 7 to 8 feet tall, had long arms, tall ears, very weird-looking legs, no tail that was visible, dark gray fur, and a long snout. This was the account told to me at a party, and then I learned that another witness from this vehicle was actually here as well. So they proceeded to tell me what happened from their point of view. They explained an almost exact scenario with a few minor story deviations, very small details. But their face started to drain of any color as they continued talking. Whether this is a memory that both individuals experienced or it's a simple trick to mess with people, they certainly held together an intricate and convincing act specifically oriented around Dogman." End quote. I am big on the reaffirmation of others being with you during a sighting. Many people see things that they can't explain and they bury it and never talk about it again. Now, this is definitely a narrative that is changing in present day. You have to be careful because you have to weave your way through all the people that are doing it for publicity or social media or likes and all that kind of stunt stuff, which is horrible because it discredits people that do have those experiences. And then it just casts this media frenzy, crazy kind of notion and aesthetic over it. And we don't want that. This is a very sensitive topic, and we're trying to work at building a good archive of information in our attempt to prove some of these things. I digress. In the situation of people that do see these things and don't go public with it, I refer to many folks a few generations ago. A completely different era that wasn't big into feelings and communication, to a very minor degree. It was a very different family vibe when you look at decades ago. And so those folks that seen things, they're hardworking family individuals, and they're out in the woods doing certain really grinding jobs, physically demanding jobs, and they see things. And you're talking about a time that you report these things, you're going to be casted out, ridiculed, and you can't afford to lose your job. You can't afford to be put in a position of humiliation because there's a certain aesthetic and atmosphere in the work environment generations ago. So you bottle it up. You go home, maybe you mention it to your wife. Maybe your wife says, hey, you got to bottle that up. Don't say it to anyone because we can't lose this job. Who knows? I am just creating a very hypothetical situation. But what is not hypothetical is so many of these older folks that have seen things and have kept it to themselves. And then they pass away without ever telling another soul what they may have seen. I can only imagine how long of a list that is. So again, the reaffirmation is great because when there's other people around, they can reassure you like, hey, you're not alone. We went through this too. And you can have that common ground. And it's something that's great to be able to share because in this case, this person exclaimed their experience and it was reaffirmed by another individual also at that party. I digress though. Moving on. This experience, lastly, has caught my attention because of how similar the scenario is to a Bigfoot, and yet it's not Bigfoot. It's a different entity altogether. And so we have this story, and I quote, "You'll hear around my town of something called the Whistling Patty. It was just a story that a friend told me because his father swore he saw it when he was younger. Well, I'm with a couple of friends at a cabin, and I had work in the morning, so I left at around midnight. I topped a hill on the road, and I saw this thing that was a grayish-white color, stood about 3 feet taller than the speed limit sign, and had bright green eyes. I immediately called one of my friends still at the cabin in a panic, and he kept saying I'm drunk and to go home. Note, I hadn't consumed any alcohol, and I'm not one to try things that screw with my mind, so no drugs were involved. After about 5 minutes of me trying to explain what I say on the phone, I gave up and hung up. I got home, and about 15 minutes later, I get a call. It's the cabin friend. He stated that they are all leaving because they heard a noise that they had never heard before after we hung up. They went inside, and they heard it again, but closer. When I asked him to explain the noise, he said it wasn't possible to mimic. It was high screech, but not a normal sound. But now they believe me, but no one else believes us." End quote. Now, I did a bit of brief research, and of course, this will be continued in a future episode deep dive on this entity. But they have been reported to make woman crying noises and baby noises to draw people out into the forests. I get shivers thinking about that because of the audio clips that exist out there of those noises in the woods. It's a very real group of reports that people experience, and if you hear those sounds, I can't stress it enough that you turn away and you leave. In the context of this encounter, though, the person was under no influences at all. They were simply getting ready to head home, gotta go to work. And I just think it's very interesting that, okay, yeah, they got a call back, and the friend's like, oh my God, like there's something out there, something making these horrible noises, and we're going to get out of here now. I don't blame them. Totally think that's vindicated. And the story just kind of reminds me of other situations, kind of, I don't know why, but a weird Dover demon scenario for some reason. I'm not sure why, but I digress. The Whistling Patty is an entity that I will be looking more into and trying to find more information on, because you have Bigfoot areas, and whether or not it is Bigfoot related, we know that Bigfoot can make very interesting audible sounds, but the woman noises and the baby noises always seems to be affiliated in high Bigfoot sighting areas and other really peculiar places. I know in Alaska, that's one of the most prominent things, is in certain very remote spots, you can hear that, and that comes from other people's reports. Again, I can't confirm that myself, but this is just information that I find and I see, and I'm just stating here. I digress. That is it for this week's episode of Cryptid Clues. Thank you for tuning in. Remember, you can find us on our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, as well as our website, CryptidClues.ca. If you wish to reach out to us directly, you can via CryptidClues@gmail.com. We're also on Patreon. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, and until next time, everybody, take care and stay safe.